I am here today to discuss the constitutional history and the making of the Constitution. 73 years hence from its establishment, way back in 1950, its origin was embedded in the struggle for independence from Britain and in the movements responsible for constitutional government in the princely states. It led to the evolution of representative institutions in the country, which began decades before 26 January 1950. The Charter Act of 1853 provided some sort of a separate legislature in the form of a 12-member Legislative Council. The Indian Councils Act 1861, which is described as the prime charter of the Indian legislature, inaugurating the system of legislative devolution in India, was followed by the Indian Councils Act of 1892 and 1909. The Act of 1909, which was an implementation of the Morley Minto reforms, introduced an element of election and representation in the Legislative Council at the Union. None of them, however, remained decisive to the native elements in matter of legislation and administration. The Government of India Act of 1919, which gave effect to the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, established a bicameral legislature at the Union for the first time and introduced some elements of responsible form for government in the provinces. The national leaders found that the 1919 reforms were inadequate, and a revision of the Government of India Act 1999, a resolution which later became famous as the National Demand, was adopted by the Central Legislative Assembly, which for the first time lent its support to the growing demand that the future Constitution of India should be framed by Indians themselves. Another significant development in the Indian constitutional history was enactment of the Government of India Act 1935. The Government of India Act 1935, it occupies a significant place in the constitutional history and has endeavored to give a written constitution to the country. But since the federal part of the 1935 Act never came into operation, only some modifications in practice and procedure remained by the introduction of autonomy in the provinces were made. The Quit India movement of 1942 lent a new thrust to the freedom struggle, and subsequently there were several efforts to work out the transfer of power and to provide for a constitutional framework for free India. As a part of these efforts, the British Cabinet Mission arrived in India on 24th March 1946. The avowed purpose of the mission was to assist the Viceroy in setting up in India the machinery by which Indians could devise their own constitution. The Cabinet Mission presented on 16th May 1946 a scheme of its own, laying down the principles and procedures for framing the future Constitution of India. Under the terms of the Cabinet Mission Plan, the members of Constituent Assembly were elected in July 1946. The India Independence Act 1947 provided that the Constituent Assembly would have unlimited power to frame and adopt any constitution and even to supersede the Indian Independence Act itself without the need for further legislation on the part of the British Parliament. The Constituent Assembly thus became a body fully representative of the states and provinces in India and fully sovereign to all external authority. As a sovereign body, it completed the task of framing the Constitution for India in the best interest of people without outside interference. On 29th August 1947, the drafting committee was elected by the Constituent Assembly under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar for preparation of a draft constitution, which took 2 years, 11 months and 17 days to be exact. They produced a document with approximately 90,000 words, and on 26th day of November 1949, it could proudly declare on behalf of the people of India that we do hereby adopt, enact and give to ourselves this constitution. 284 members actually appended their signatures, to the Constitution that was finally passed. After the 104th Amendment, 448 articles and 12 schedules came into being, which was initially 395 articles and 8 schedules. The rest of the Constitution of India came into force on 26th January 1950. On that day, the Constituent Assembly ceased to exist, transforming itself into the Provisional Parliament of India until a new parliament was constituted in 1952. Looking at the philosophy of the Constitution, the Preamble to the Constitution of India embodies and reflects the fundamental values, philosophies, objectives on which the Constitution is based. Pandit Thakurdas Bhargav, a member of the Constituent Assembly then, summed up the importance of the Preamble in the following words. I quote, "The Preamble is the most precious part of the Constitution. It is the soul of the Constitution." Unquote. Reading the Preamble, as we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. The Preamble of the Constitution of India presents the principles and also indicates the sources of its authority. It was drafted and moved in the Constituent Assembly by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru on 13 December 1946 and accepted on 22nd January 1947, to be adopted on 26 November 1949 and finally came into effect on 26 January 1950, celebrated as the Republic Day of India. The 42nd Amendment was made during emergency by our Prime Minister then, the late Srimati Indira Gandhi, wherein the words socialist and secular were added in the preamble between sovereign and democratic. The Supreme Court held that the preamble can be amended provided no amendment is made in the basic structure. The other questions was whether the preamble is a part of the Constitution. In 1960, in the Beriberi case, the Supreme Court held that the preamble is not an integral part of the Constitution, which was overruled in 73 in the case of Nanda case versus State of Kerala, and finally in 1995 in the case of Union Government versus LIC of India, held that the preamble is an integral part of the Constitution. The preamble discloses the source of the Constitution, lays down the date of the commencement of the Constitution, the right and freedom with which the people of India wished to secure for themselves, and also the nature of the government. The term sovereign indicates independent authority of a state and the power to legislate on any subject and is not subject to the control of any state or external authority. D.D. Basu said that India is to remain as Commonwealth of the Nation and United Nations Organization is a voluntary association. The term socialist, which came as 42nd Amendment in 1976, refers to democratic socialism to be achieved through democratic, evolutionary and non-violent means, that is, distributive justice. Secular, a relationship between the government and religious groups, giving them equal freedom for all religions. Democratic, a concept of political philosophy, but also refers to social and economic democracy and effective due to diverse population. Republic, the head is elected not as a hereditary monarch, rather there is an absence of a privileged class altogether. Justice comes in the rule of law, absence of arbitrariness, and to give rise to a just and egalitarian society. The social, economic, and the political. Along with this, we have liberty to exercise with the constitutional limits one's actions or thought processes as specified under Article 19 of the Constitution. Equality is absence of special privilege by abolishing titles of honor, untouchable, etc. Fraternity is a sense of brotherhood or sisterhood, a sense of belonging to the country by transcending religious, linguistics, regional or sectional diversities. 3 original copies of the Constitution are kept safely in the special helium-filled cases in the library of the Parliamentary. Interestingly, the rule book was not printed or typed out, but handwritten by Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada in flowing italic style and decorated by Bihar Ram Manohar Sinha of Jabalpur, who was with the Acharya Nand Lal Bose from Shanti Niketan, West Bengal. The Constitution has borrowed provisions from the constitutions of United Kingdom, United States of America, Ireland, USSR, now known as Russia, Australia, and the like, but has several salient features keeping in mind India's tradition, historical, geographical, and cultural diversity. Number of amendments were made in the very first draft of the Constitution, and thereafter from time to time, as per the need of the times, 105 amendments have been made till date, the recent one being to pursue land boundary agreement 1974 between India and Bangladesh, goods and service tax, that is GST 2016, constitutional status granted to National Commission for Backward Classes, that is NCBC 2018, 10% reservation of EWS of citizens of classes other than the classes mentioned in Clause 4 and 5 of Article 15, 2019. Extended the deadline for cessation of seats for SCs and STs in the Lok Sabha from 70 years to 80, and removed the reserved seats for the Anglo-Indian community in the Lok Sabha and State Assemblies 2020. The Constitution Act 2021 restored the power of the state governments to recognize socially and educationally backward classes, 18th August 2021. B.R. Ambedkar said that Constitution is not a mere lawyer's document, it is a vehicle of life, and its spirit is always the spirit of age. It not only describes the basic principles of the state, the structure, processes of governments, and the fundamental rights of citizens, but also envisions a path of growth and development for a nation. In commemoration of the 125th birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar on 26 November in 2015, a decision was taken by both houses of parliament to celebrate 26 November as Constitution Day, which was earlier commemorated as National Law Day after a resolution by the Supreme Court Bar Association, a lawyers' body, in 1979. Ambedkar said that our object in framing the Constitution is twofold: to lay down the form of political democracy and to lay down that our ideal is economic democracy, and also to prescribe that every government, whatever is in power, shall strive to bring about economic democracy. The Constitution steers the nation to realize the dreams and aspirations of the people by accommodating and adapting to the changing needs and realities of the time. Making India, that is Bharat, and as a union of states, equality before the law and equal protection of the law is the essence of the Constitution. It chooses parliamentary system of democracy since it gives preference to responsibility and stability. The untiring efforts made by the drafting committee handed generations down the line a unique scheme of governance which is not only democratic but an inclusive society, and the prerequisite being dignified human existence and a good of all with accountability as the lifeline. The pivot for the Constitution is the centrality of the people. Next is the fundamental rights and directive principles which lie in Part 3 and 4 of the Constitution and is the very conscience of the Constitution. 6 essential components of the fundamental rights are right to equality, freedom of religion, culture, right against exploitation. The directive principles as contained in Article 38 enshrine the ideal of social precepts which aim at realizing the goal of a welfare state. The constitutional framework of governance defines the role of each organ of state, which is legislature, executive and the judiciary, with separation of powers and yet a harmonious relationship, and in case of doubt, it is cleared on the anvil of the Constitution. Nature of federal structure. The term Union of States is preferred over Federation of States Act, as the country is one integral whole, its people a single people, living under a single imperium derived from a single source, Ambedkar said. The Constitution provides neither purely federal nor purely unitary and works as a combination depending upon the circumstances. This flexibility ensures a variety of center-state relationships. It empowers the people as much as the people empower the Constitution. It is thus very significant and important today to understand that each and every citizen, no matter how detailed and well documented the Constitution is, it ceases to have meaning without the right people to implement it and live by its value. It is in this that they placed their faith in generations that would follow. Thus, the Parliament a conduit, making the vision of the Constitution a reality. It is responsible for bringing about social change, effecting socio-economic transformation, and is the lifeline of all governmental activities. In 1931, Gandhiji had written, "I shall strive for a constitution which will release India from the thraldom and patronage. We shall be at peace with the rest of the world, neither exploiting nor exploited," and also mentioned a classless society free from any kind of discrimination. We have every right today to feel proud that our Constitution is recognized across the world for democratic and secular values, as well as for establishing an inclusive social order. Thank you.